Good morning. What's today? Today's Friday. It's the second day of the conference. Thank you for coming back. And I've got some housekeeping to do before we have our second invited speaker come up. First of all laptops are banned in the conference from now on. Apparently the speakers were complaining that you weren't paying enough attention to them. Inside joke, Joel. The dine around dinners, if you have to sign up by 1 p.m. today, otherwise they're going to release the reservations for any of those that didn't obtain sufficient number of sign-ups, I guess. And the sign-up sheets are in the registration room. That's Krongard, which is where the CALI staff are in there hoarding the donuts. Is Levon here? Good. Library and tech tours at 12 and 12:30. 2 tours. You can find out where they start. It's on the agenda sheet. All right? But there's 2 tours twice. 4 tours total. There is a tour of the catacombs, which I believe are right beneath us this very moment. So I'll whisper this. At 6:30 tonight, there's a tour of the catacombs. Costs $5. You meet by Edgar Allan Poe's grave. On the corner of Fayette and Green, sign up at registration. The tours last about an hour and a half, so this is serious stuff. You have to be dedicated to this. Okay, good. Janet Cinder, are you in the room? Janet, stand up. There's always one person who just sticks out as like awesome on the local staff, and that person here at Maryland is Janet Cinder, and I wanted to make sure that we pointed this out early and often. Thank you, Janet. Elmer says you can eat his lunch, and he'll talk about Drupal in return today in room 107. Starting, well, grab your lunch and come on over. He'll be there. There's the ad hoc meeting of people who are interested in talking more about simple, simulated professional learning environment at lunch in room 108. Again, just grab your lunch and come on over. Karen and Pat will be doing actual demonstrations of the actual tools to be used. Right? Okay. Luggage room, look for signs. There will be a link on the wiki for evaluations for the conference, or you could just grab a staff member and tell them what you think. If you want to do it anonymously, then we don't want to hear from you. Just kidding. All right. That's it for housekeeping. All right. And unlike past conferences, this would be like the last time you would see we would be together in a plenary situation, but we've added another plenary, which is at the very end of the conference. It's sort of a wrap-up, an opportunity to have a little bit of an unsession, you might say. That's tomorrow, what, at 3:30? Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong page. 2:30 or something like that. So we'll be back again together at that point. But now, let us have our second keynote speaker. His name is Joel Garreau. Garreau. It's pronounced many different ways, I understand. So I might as well get them all wrong, right? Joel's a reporter and an editor at the Washington Post, and he's a principal of the Garreau Group, which is the network of his best sources committed to understanding who we are, how we got that way, and where we're headed worldwide. He has served as a senior fellow at the University of California at Berkeley and George Mason University, and is an affiliate of the James Martin Institute for Science and Civilization at Oxford. He is a member of GBN, the Global Business Network. And you may not know it, but actually we've had several speakers over the years who are members or part of the GBN. The GBN is the pioneering senior scenario planning organization. And most intriguing of all, Joe is a troll of a small forest in the foothills of Virginia's Blue Ridge. So Joel, please welcome Joel and come on up.
John. Thank you.
You're set.
Thank you, John. God, that's terrific. I'm going to have him preach my funeral. What I want to talk to you about today is suppose the theme of this CALI conference is true. Suppose that the situation that we're in right now is that we are but caterpillars, and the question is, what kind of butterflies are we going to be looking like, when we emerge? The reason I'm going to be talking about this is that we're at a turning point in history. For the first time in hundreds of thousands of years, our technologies are not so much aimed outward at modifying our environment in the fashion of fire or clothes or cities or agriculture or space travel. For the first time, our technologies are increasingly aimed inward at modifying our minds, our memories, our metabolisms, our personalities, and our kids. And if you can do all that, you're at the startling point where you're becoming the first species to take control of your own evolution. And not in some distant science fiction future, but right now, on our watch. And what I'm going to be talking about today is sort of a roadmap to the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years in which this happens. Let me give you a law school example of what that world might look like. In 1913, U.S. government officials prosecuted Lee DeForest for telling investors that his company, RCA, would soon be able to transmit the human voice across the Atlantic Ocean. This claim was so preposterous, prosecutors asserted, that he was obviously swindling potential investors. He was ultimately released, but not before being lectured by the judge to stop making any more fraudulent claims. With this legal reasoning in mind, flash forward a decade and a half from now. Look at the girl who is today your second-grade daughter. 15 years from now, she is just home for the holidays. You were so proud of her when she not only put herself through Ohio State, but graduated summa cum laude. Now she has taken on her most formidable challenge yet, competing with her generation's elite in her fancy new law school. Of course, you want to hear all about it. It's her first time home in months. But the difference between this touching tableau and similar ones in the past is that in this scenario, which is factually grounded in technologies that are already in development, changes in human nature are readily available in the marketplace. She is competing with those with the will and the wherewithal to adopt these technologies. So you ask innocently, what are your classmates like, honey? They're all really, really smart, she says. But then she thinks of some of the students in contracts class, and she stops. How does she explain what the enhanced kids are like, she wonders. She knows her dear old parents have read in their news magazines about some of what's available, but actually dealing with some of her new classmates is decidedly strange. They have amazing thinking abilities. They're not only faster and more creative than anybody she's ever met, but faster and more creative than anybody she's ever imagined. They have photographic memories and total recall. They can devour books in minutes. They're beautiful physically. Although they don't put much of a premium on exercise, their bodies are remarkably ripped. They talk casually about living a very long time, perhaps being immortal. They're always discussing their next lives. One fellow mentions how, after he makes his pile as a lawyer, he plans to be a glass blower, after which he wants to become a nanosurgeon. One of her new friends fell while jogging, opening up a nasty gash on her knee. Your daughter freaked, ready to rush her to the hospital. but her friend just stared at the gaping wound, focusing her mind on it. Within minutes, it simply stopped bleeding. This same friend has been vaccinated against pain. She never feels acute pain for long. These new friends are always connected to each other, sharing their thoughts no matter how far apart, with no apparent gear. They call it silent messaging. It almost seems like telepathy. They have this odd habit of cocking their head in a certain way whenever they want to access information they don't yet have in their skulls, as if waiting for a delivery to arrive wirelessly, which it does. For a week or more at a time, they don't sleep. They joke about getting rid of their beds in their cramped dorm rooms since they use them so rarely. Her new friends are polite when she can't keep up with their conversations, as if she were handicapped. They can't help but condescend to her, however, when she protests that embedded technology is not natural for humans. That's what they call her, natural. In fact, that's what they call all those who could be like them but choose not to, the way vegetarians choose to abstain from meat. They call themselves enhanced. And those who have neither the education nor the money to even consider keeping up with enhancement technologies, these they dismiss as simply the rest. The poor dears, they just keep falling farther and farther behind. Everyone in your daughter's law school takes it as a matter of course that the law that they are studying is changing to match the new realities. The law will be upgraded, the enhanced believe, just as they have new physical and mental upgrades installed every time they go home. The technology is just moving that fast. In fact, the paper your daughter is working on over the holidays concerns whether a natural can really enter into an informed consent relationship with an enhanced, even for something as simple as a date. How would a natural understand what makes an enhanced tick if she doesn't understand how he is augmented? The law is based on Enlightenment principles that we hold a human nature in common. Increasingly, the question is whether this still exists. I call this scenario the law of unintended consequences. It is not a prediction. I have no crystal ball, unfortunately. I wish. But this scenario is a faithful rendition of what our world will be like if only some of the engineering currently being funded turns out to work. Well, let me tell you how I got into this School of Inquiry. Okay, Joe. All right, good. God, I hate technology. This is one of my favorite New Yorker cartoons. I don't know if you can read the caption in the back. It says, obviously, they're evolving much faster than we are. Well, let me see a show of hands. Is anybody here old enough to remember when computer screens only came in black and white? Okay, good. Is anybody here old enough to remember rotary dial phones? All right. Is anyone here old enough to remember what mimeograph machine fluids smell like? You junkies. Is anyone here old enough to remember polio? Well, the reason that litany is amusing is that we've been living through a period of exponential change. Many of you know its most recent version. How many here know what I'm talking about when I refer to Moore's Law? All right. This is a substantially geeky crowd. I don't usually get that response, by the way. All right, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, back in 1965, there was a physical chemist named Gordon E. Moore. And he was working on the first computer chips, which had started running off the assembly line 6 years before, in 1959. And in 1965, he noticed that the number of transistors that you could get onto a piece of silicon for $1 had been regularly doubling every few months. And he boldly predicted that these doublings would continue for another 10 years. Well, little did he know. Gordon E. Moore would go on to become one of the 3 founders of Intel, and now is a bazillionaire many times over. But what he'll probably be most remembered for by history is Moore's Law, which is now the core faith of the entire information technology industry worldwide. And the way it is usually stated now is that the amount of computer firepower that you'll be able to buy for $1 will double every 18 months for as far as the eye can see. Now, a doubling is an amazing thing. It means that change is not linear. It means that change is occurring on a curve like this. A doubling means that every 18 months, each step is as tall as all of the previous steps put together. And there's amazing implications to this. I mean, everybody here has experienced the routine of advising. Somebody wants to buy their kid a computer for, Christmas, and they all come to you and say, what should I buy? And they end up getting some whiz-bang machine for $2,000, and it's got 512 of this and 60 gigs of something else, and, it's a real fire breather. And, of course, the very next Christmas, that $2,000 machine is available for $1,300, and everybody's mad at you, right? And by the arithmetic of Moore's Law, that exact same amount of firepower 10 Christmases later will be available for $31.25, and it'll be available for free with a subscription to Newsweek. And it will no longer be on your desktop. It'll look like this. Has anybody here got an iPhone? He said naively. Yes. Well, an iPhone has more computer firepower in it than did the entire North American Air Defense Command in 1965 when Gordon Moore first prophesied. And this stuff has consequences, one of which is that in the near future, the computer is going to end up looking like this. The patents for this, as you know, probably already exist at MIT. This is the magic handkerchief computer. It's a flexible screen. It does voice in, voice out, so it doesn't need a keyboard. And you can take it anywhere. And I'm really looking forward to this because it means that I'll finally be able to read the Washington Post in the smallest room of the house, where I get my best reading done, where it's a little awkward to bring a laptop. But the other thing it means is that because of the arithmetic of Moore's Law, it means that the last 20 years is not a guide to the next 20 years. It's at best a guide to the next 8. And the last 50 years is not a guide to the next 50 years. It's at best a guide to the next 14. So this sort of accelerated change is beginning to have major impacts on all of our institutions, including our schools and the law itself. But this is hardly anything new. We're now in the third form of evolution. The first kind is the one you're all familiar with, biological evolution, what Darwin looked at. And you can see a curve of accelerating change in biological evolution. The time from the first organisms to the first mammals took 400 million years. From the first mammals to the first monkeys took 150 million years. From monkeys to chimps took 30 million years. See how this is accelerating? From chimps to walking erect took 16 million. From walking erect to painting on cave walls took 4 million. Then it really begins to pick up. From painting on cave walls to the first fixed settlements took 10,000 years. And then from that to writing took 4,000 years. Now, at that point, when we've got fixed settlements and writing, evolution kicks into a second level of acceleration, because then you've got cultural evolution. You're able to share and store and transmit your ideas far beyond your limited little hunting band. So the pace really begins to pick up. So from writing to the Roman Empire took 4,000 years, and then to the Industrial Revolution took 1,800 years, and then to first flight only 100 years. 66 years later, we're on the moon, wondering what we've done. And 20 years later, we're in the information age, wondering whether we like this. Now we're moving into a third form of evolution, what I call radical evolution, what some people call engineered evolution. This is the period at which we really begin to start taking control of our own bodies and minds and metabolisms. Let me give you some examples here. This is my favorite monkey. Her name is Belle. She's at Duke. She's funded by DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, which is the R&D arm of the Pentagon. And Belle is the world's first telekinetic monkey. She can move objects long distance with her thoughts. I'm not making this up. Would anyone care to know how you make a monkey telekinetic? Oh, I'm so glad. What they did at Duke was, the first thing they did is they got her hooked on a computer game. She's a really smart monkey. I mean, what they did is they gave her a joystick, and if she could make the cursor hit a flashing light, she'd get a drop of juice. Within a matter of days, it became clear that she almost cared about the juice, right? She's hooked on the computer game. So when that occurred, they then drilled a hole in her head, and they took a device about the size of a baby aspirin with hundreds of superfine wires coming out of it, and they inserted it in her motor cortex, which controls muscle movement. And the point of those wires was that they lined each individual wire up with a neuron in her brain, so that when the neuron fired, the wire would notice it and report the firing signal to the computer to which everything was hooked up. Are you with me so far? Okay. So then they proceeded to seal her up and fire up the computer game, and she started to play the game and hit the flashing light. And as that was occurring, they would watch her neurons firing in her brain, and they would soon figure out what pattern meant what in terms of her brain and her muscle movement. Then came the important part. They disconnected the joystick so that nothing she did with the joystick would matter anymore. And they fired up the computer game, and of course, because she's a really smart monkey, she rapidly figured out that by thinking about how she would use her arm to move the cursor, she could actually move the cursor. And sure enough, the cursor hits the flashing light just with the power of her motor cortex neurons. And everybody in North Carolina goes nuts and starts high-fiving themselves all over the place. And then, to be cool about it, they took the signal and they piped it up in real time to MIT, 600 miles north. And there, a robotic arm, responding to the signals from her brain, started dancing like a ballerina in exactly the fashion that her arm would be moving had she been using her arm to control the cursor. Now, I submit to you that if you've got a monkey that can control a robotic arm 600 miles away with her thoughts, what you've got is a telekinetic monkey. Now, the obvious question is, why? Why would you want to do this to a monkey? And as usual, there's two answers. There's the official answer, and then there's the real answer. Well, the official answer is that an F-22 jet fighter is a very complicated machine to control with a joystick. So DARPA is very keen on trying to work out mind-machine interfaces, ways to control machines with your mind. And the way they would love to see this work is that it would work in two directions, so that not only could you control the machine with your thoughts, but that everything that the machine can sense in terms of radar, radio, heat signals, whatever you've got, could be piped directly into your brain, bypassing keyboards and screens. And they just think this would be cooler than it's not. So that's the official reason. Now, the real reason is that the guy who was running at the time the Defense Sciences Office that was funding this was named Michael Goldblatt. And Michael has a daughter named Gina Marie. Gina Marie is a very talented young lady. She's graduated from the University of Arizona. She wants to go to law school, and she's got cerebral palsy. So she is supposed to spend the rest of her life in a wheelchair. And her father, Michael, is very upfront about the fact that he has spent, God only knows how many millions of your taxpayers' dollars on this mind-machine interface work, because in principle, if you can control a machine with your thoughts, there is no reason why those machines can't be in Gina Marie's legs. So Michael has spent all of that money to get his daughter out of that wheelchair and get her up to walk. Now, this has already started to have consequences. In 2004, this technology was first used on a human in Boston named Matthew Nagel. Matthew is not the world's sweetest human being. He got into a knife fight some years ago, and he ended up getting his spinal cord severed at the neck, so he's locked up from the neck down. So he had nothing better to do, so he volunteered to have this same kind of technology embedded in his brain. And so in 2004, he became the first human to send an email with his thoughts. I mean, one of the reasons I'm telling you all this is that one of the problems I've got discussing radical evolution and engineered evolution is getting people to believe what actually exists, much less what's in the pipeline. But because of Moore's law, this stuff is coming at us ever faster. And we're beginning to have a discussion about this in our newspapers, oddly enough, in our sports pages first. Anybody know who this is? Barry Bonds, right? I mean, we're having this discussion in our sports pages about whether Barry should spend the rest of his life going around with an asterisk on his forehead, because he's really not the same kind of human as the people whose records he broke. And this is just using the most primitive existing technologies like steroids and human growth hormone. I mean, considering what's in the pipeline, you know, this is nothing. But what's interesting is that you see the fastest uptake of these enhancement technologies wherever there's the most competition. So it makes sense that you're seeing it first on your sports pages. You're also seeing it very quickly in the military where there's competition. And you're also seeing it in the beauty industry, sex industry, you know, Botox, Viagra, stuff like that. There was recently a cover story in People magazine with some amazing babe from Desperate Housewives on the cover, sexy va-va-va-voom. Turns out the occasion was that she had just turned 40. Didn't used to always be this way, you know, that 40-year-olds were seen as, you know, sex symbols, and that they were lauded. I mean, how often now do you see this, you know, in everyday conversation in which you talk to some 80-year-old, you know, and they're heading off to go walk the Great Wall of China, and you say, what's up with that, you know, and they say, oh, well, 80 is the new 60, you know, and you talk to people who are starting their third or eighth career and they're 60, and you say, you know, isn't it time for retirement? And they say, no, 60 is the new 40. Well, you're beginning to see this in common parlance. And the significance of this is that you've got 4 technologies that are at work that are producing this change on an ongoing basis, and I call them the GRIN technologies for genetics, robotics, information technology, and nanotechnology. Anybody know who this is? CALI, of course. All right, this is the G in the GRIN technologies, and it's more than just genetics, actually. This is about manipulating and understanding life and our cells at its very most basic level. And this has tons of implications. The pharmaceuticals alone has tons of implications already for law schools and for any kind of schools. I just about guarantee you that I can walk out this door and in no time at all score some cognition enhancing pharmaceuticals for you for about $5. Cognition enhancement pharmaceuticals, these are legit, brand name, real deal pharmaceuticals, are now a $3.6 billion a year gray market in colleges and universities around the country. Most of them right now are ADHD drugs, because what happens with these enhancements is that they are always initially aimed at people who are really sick. So, for example, one of these enhancement drugs that you can buy on the gray market outside this door, for example, is Provigil, aka modafinil. And what this drug does is it shuts off the human trigger to sleep. It's not a stimulant. It's not speed. There's none of these adverse side effects that you associate with speed that that screws up your judgment. It simply turns off the trigger to sleep. This has been, and so it's originally aimed at narcoleptics who fall asleep uncontrollably, but of course, as soon as it's licensed for that, then the medical industry is encouraged to see who else it'll work on. And of course, so it moves out to the needy well, like truck drivers, for example. One of the first tests for the needy well was Army helicopter pilots, young, healthy helicopter pilots. And they were put in a simulator, and they had extremely, running a helicopter, especially in a battle situation, is a very complicated thing to do. They did that for 40 hours straight, and at the end of the 40 hours, they were still performing as well as or better than the people who were fresh. Then they let them sleep for 8 hours, and they brought them back up, and they did it for another 40 hours, and they were still operating as fresh. And so, of course, and that's obviously, this is something that people pay a lot of attention to. So what happens after these enhancements go from the sick to the needy well, they then go to the merely ambitious. And that's where you find kids who want to get into Harvard Law. Because as it turns out, the only really notable side effect of modafinil, in addition to just shutting off the trigger to sleep, is that it offers mildly increased concentration. When I first wrote about this stuff, I wrote the entire 3,000-word article under the influence in 40 hours. And when I handed it in, my editor said, "Gee, this reads a lot cleaner than your copy usually does." So trust me, this works. And now, in the next 3 or 4 years, there are 4 U.S. companies in clinical trials right now with memory pills that enhance your memory. Obviously, these are going to be aimed at Alzheimer's victims, but there are going to be 78 million baby boomers who view themselves as the needy well. We can't remember where we parked our car. We can't remember if we have a car. The guys who are doing developing these pharmaceuticals are convinced that when this hits the market, they're just richer than you can imagine, because they think this is bigger than Viagra, Well, now think about the next step when it moves out to the merely ambitious. Think about what memory does, the role memory plays in law school, right? Think about the role it plays in language acquisition. And this is just the beginning, just the beginnings of the pharmaceutical impacts And as we move along into the full-scale genetic workup, it's going to be even more dramatic. Then, all right, so that's the G in the GRIN technologies. Then there's the R, which is robotics. Robotics is about the melding of the made and the born. This thing here is a Predator, which is an unmanned air vehicle. And it is not entirely autonomous. It does have a human being in the decision-making loop, although it does 90% of its flying itself. In 2002, a Predator became arguably the first robot to incinerate a human being. What happened was that one of these Predators that was at the time being run by the CIA was over Yemen, and it caught up with an SUV that it was identified as being full of Al-Qaeda leaders. And so it came up low and slow behind it and fired a Hellfire missile and left a large smoking crater where the SUV was. Now, you can get an argument from thoughtful people about whether or not this thing is truly a robot. It is not entirely autonomous. There was a human being in the loop, and it made the order to pull the trigger. Okay? But this sort of distinction might be considered overly fine if you were one of the guys in the SUV. You know, the fact is that what you've got is an increasing melding of the made and the born. In fact, what we've got, either existing or in development, is all of the powers of the comic book superheroes from the 1930s and 40s. At the University of California at Berkeley, for example, there is an exoskeleton. Has anybody seen the movie Iron Man? Okay, well, the Iron Man suit actually exists. Not at the level of the movie yet, but I've jitterbugged in this thing, and what it is you kind of back into it. Think of it as a wearable robot suit that you put on, and what it does is it feels your muscle movement as you move, and it amplifies it, such that you can carry a 180-pound pack as if it were 4 pounds. This exists. Again, DARPA's at work. When I first looked at this thing, I said, does this thing allow you to leap tall buildings with a single bound? And the guy said, sure. Landing, now that's a problem. But leaping the tall building, no problem at all. And we've got tons of other machines that are doing this. I mean, if you can, all of the guys who fly these Predators right now over Afghanistan and Iraq are physically in Las Vegas. I submit to you that if you can see Iraq from Las Vegas in real time, you've got telescopic vision. There's a device called a cave pinger that allows you to look into a cave in Afghanistan to determine what's in it. And I mean, that's basically oil company technology that looks through geology. And if you've got that, I submit you've got X-ray vision. If you've got a functional magnetic resonance imaging machine that can watch your brain in real time and determine whether or not you're telling a lie or the truth, which exists at the University of Pennsylvania, then arguably you've got the powers of the shadow to know what evil lurks in the hearts of men. Okay, so that's the R in the GRIN technologies. And then this is I for the information technologies. I don't know who this dude is here, but I love him. We just passed a moment in history in which there is now more than one cell phone for every 2 humans on Earth. This is the fastest technological uptake of any device in history, including the polio vaccine. It's already beginning to change the world because the fastest uptake has been not in places like the United States or Europe, but in the developing world where landlines were frequently non-existent. So that, you know, in Lagos, Nigeria, the market women, who are the guts of the economy, no longer are the slaves, basically, of their middlemen. they can shop around. If you're a fisherman in India, you're no longer the slave of your wholesaler in your port. You can call ports up and down the coast to see where you get the best price even before your nets are out of the water. This is transforming Africa and Asia, and it's only the beginning. There are also increasingly computer implants that really start making a connection between mind and machine. One of them are Cochlear Implants. There's about 30,000 people in this country who have them. They are basically, these are for people who are profoundly deaf. These are not hearing aids. These are for people who've got nothing functioning really in their ear. What it is a computer that listens and turns the signal into a signal that your audio nerves can process and go directly into the brain. In 2004, the FDA licensed the first ocular implants, which are basically the same thing for eyes, computer cameras that are wired directly into your retina. What's interesting about all of these technologies is, of course, that one of the things that's going down in addition to price is size. Is anybody here old enough to remember when music players were 4 great big boxes covered with walnut that you had to put up on your bookshelf? Anybody here old enough to remember that? Okay. And, well, then it became something you carried, right, like a Walkman. Now it's a piece of jewelry, like the Nano. You know, at some point, I mean, this curve means that it'll be an earring, you know, or some other body piercing that I don't want to think about. But the implications of this are profound. Right now in Afghanistan, again, remember, I'm using military examples because wherever there's the most competition, that's where you see the first uptake. In Afghanistan right now, there are universal translators that some troops carry into battle on their chest. It's basically a small laptop, and the screen comes down like this, and it has voice in, voice out, and it will do about 5,000 words of translating in both directions in any language you've got. You know, where are the bad guys? You know, up against the wall, whatever you want to do. Now, since that already exists, it's, again, just a matter of time before that becomes an earring. At what point do these translators then go the path of the cochlear implants and start getting wired directly into your brain? Okay? Suppose tomorrow you could buy a chip to be implanted in your brain that would make you fluent in Mandarin Chinese. Who'd go for that? Interesting. I usually get about half the audience when I say that. That's a pretty amazing thing that we're already ready for that. Okay. Then there's nanotechnology. Now, this is a fanciful drawing that I stole from Wired magazine. Nano is the least advanced of these 4 technologies, but in some ways it's the most profound in its implications. Nano is about creating anything you want, 1 atom at a time or 1 molecule at a time. Anything you want. Diamonds, spacecraft, molecularly accurate T-bone steaks, you know, whatever you've got. And the stuff that's on the market right now that's uses nanotechnology is not particularly startling yet. One of the uses is that you can now find nano-impregnated pants that never stain, okay? Which means that there are geeks running around who have not washed their clothes in 6 months. I didn't promise you a rose garden about the social implications of this stuff, but that's what I'm going to get into next. But it's thought that half of the Fortune 500 may be gone in 15 or 20 years because if you're in manufacturing, you're either in nano or you're dead. It's according to a congressional study, it's thought to be $1 trillion a year business by 2015, which is roughly the GNP of Canada. And this has amazing implications for biology because one of the first generation uses of this is going to be, quote, nanobots, tiny little robots that are smaller than a human blood cell. You stick a bunch of those in your bloodstream, and the first generation version is meant to be a watchdog looking for something to go wrong, like a cancer cell beginning to metastasize. And then the second generation is supposed to be hunter-killers that go in there and start attacking whatever it is you don't want, like fat cells, for example. When I was, first writing about this, and they were talking about running, your cells at a metabolic level that allows you to, start destroying your fat at will, I'm writing this down, and all of a sudden I suddenly realized they're talking about eliminating fat at will, at which point I say, me, give some to me. I have been working out for how long, to what effect, and when you say this at DARPA, they smile this little smile and they say, the civilian implications of these technologies have not eluded us. Dieting is a $40 billion a year industry in this country, and with these technologies, we're talking about that being over. Okay, so much for the toys. I really don't care that much about the technologies. My area of interest is culture, values, and society. So what I'm really interested in is, where does this take us in terms of our families, ourselves, our institutions, our law schools? And when you talk to the people who are developing these technologies, you get three scenarios for the future about how this could work out: heaven, hell, and prevail. Now, these are not predictions, although the guys who are talking about this frequently think that they're predictions, but I'm treating them as scenarios in which these are plausible, credible stories about the future, could happen, and the question is, how would we prepare ourselves for these various stories? In the heaven scenario, you've got this curve of exponential change, and you can see the effects of this in your newspaper headlines almost on a daily basis, in which you're seeing headlines in which people are attacking stupidity, ignorance, ugliness, disease, pain, forgetfulness, suffering, and even death. At the National Institutes of Health and National Institute on Aging, there are sober, serious scientists who've got a big bet going, serious money, that the first person to live in a robust and youthful fashion to the age of 150 is already alive today. And for all I know, she's in this room. Now, this is not people drooling on their shoes, mind you. This is in a robust and youthful fashion. And at Cambridge, in the UK, there's a geneticist named Aubrey de Grey who seriously thinks that the first person to live in a robust fashion to the age of 1,000 is already alive today. And he may be wrong, but he's not nuts. There are a lot of sober, serious people who are paying attention to him. Okay, so that's the heaven scenario. The change goes up like that, and it's amazing results that change what it means to be human, and it's all good. But of course, that's only one scenario. There's also the hell scenario, which is the mirror image of this. In this version, you've got the change coming at you ever faster. But in this version, in this scenario, the question is, well, what happens if the power of this technology gets in the hands of madmen or fools? For example, there was the Australian mousepox incident. Anybody hear about this? Australia is one of these isolated ecosystems that from time to time has an introduced species that just runs amok because it has no significant competitors, and one of these apparently is mice. From time to time, they're just up to their butts in mice. So they're very keen on coming up with a mouse contraceptive. And so they had geneticists working on this, and what they produced was a monster. They made one change in the mousepox virus, and all of a sudden that virus became 100% fatal. Every single mouse died. And then they took what they'd learned and they put it on the internet where anybody can see it. Well, this just drives people who are involved in the hell scenario nuts. because now the information is available to anybody. The mousepox virus doesn't hurt humans, but it's a close relative of the smallpox virus, which obviously does. So the question is, what happens if these technologies are not like nuclear weapons. This doesn't take an entire nation. In the case of biology, it takes one reasonably bright grad student, in a fairly well-equipped lab who's nuts. And this could have profound implications for our futures. Okay, so that's the heaven and hell scenarios, but those are only two. The third one is prevail. And this is the one I'm kind of pulling for personally. I'm not predicting it, but this is the most humanist of the three scenarios. The thing about the heaven and hell scenario is that they are both techno-deterministic, by which I mean they're a view of the future that is based on the notion that technology is in control of our society and our futures, and we're basically along for the ride. Heaven and hell scenarios don't have a lot of plot. If they were made into a summer blockbuster movie, it would be pretty simple. It would be amazing change is happening. There's not much we can do about it. Hang on tight. The end. Amazing special effects, but not much in the way of plot. By contrast, prevail is not some middle ground between heaven and hell. It's often its own territory because it's got a fundamentally different premise. Heaven and hell is based on the notion that what matters is how many transistors you can get to talk to each other. Prevail is based on the notion that what matters is how many ornery, cussed, imaginative, unpredictable humans you can get to talk to each other. The core of prevail is based on the notion that suppose there's not one curve, suppose there's two. If the curve of change is coming at us like this, well, if our responses are more or less flat, we're obviously toast, right? Because the gap just keeps on getting wider and wider. But suppose our responses are going up almost as fast as our challenges. That's at the heart of prevail. And there's some reasons for guarded optimism about this in history. For example, if you looked out at the future of the human race from the 1200s, from the Middle Ages, you'd be pretty pessimistic, right? You'd be seeing marauding hordes, and you'd be seeing plagues, and you think, oh, this sucks. Okay, so then in 1450, all of a sudden you get the printing press, and you've got a brand new way to store and share and transmit ideas, and the results are just amazing, First you get the Renaissance, and then you get the Enlightenment, which leads to science itself and to democracy and to the world we have today, in which the concerns of the 1200s seem antique at best. Similarly, more recently, you saw this kind of fast response bottom-up curve on 9/11. The fourth plane never makes it to its target. Why? Because the Air Force is so smart? No. Because the White House is so smart? Hell no. It's because of a handful of people on board that aircraft, empowered by their airphone technology, figured out, diagnosed, and cured their society's ills in a little under an hour flat. Was it a perfect solution? No, of course not. They all died. But it was good enough. And it's that good enough bottom-up part that's at the heart of prevail. Prevail is not about solutions coming down from the top. It's not about top-down hierarchies. Top-down hierarchies are all about the industrial age. Top-down hierarchies don't move fast enough to deal with the challenges that are coming at us. That's why prevail puts a huge premium on the notion of bottom-up solutions. Again, you saw it in the middle. I mean, the people of Venice didn't go out to create world trade. They were, trying to avoid all these hordes who were taking over their land. So they moved out into a swamp and create Venice. And then, in order to try to find something to do, then they created world trade. So the big deal about prevail is the way you'd know that it was kicking in is suppose you saw all sorts of behavior that was grouped behavior that was really interesting, that was basically beyond the imagination of any leaders, any governments, and so forth. Can you think of any examples like that? What about YouTube? It's beginning to change. It's already begun to change the election, right? What about eBay? I mean, that's not just the world's biggest flea market. That's hundreds of thousands of people who are doing incredibly complicated behavior without any leaders. What about Wikipedia? What about Facebook, my God? The deal is that what you're seeing is, right now, is indeed an awful lot of bottom-up behavior that is people who are doing the best they can. And so if your test is you're looking for a change in the quantity, quality, variety, and complexity of ways that humans find to connect. The test is interesting group behavior, like a flock doing amazing things. Now, the significance of all this is that, it's occurred to me to think, and again, this is one of my favorite New Yorker cartoons. For those of you in the back, it says, "I was wondering when you'd notice there's lots more steps." The larger significance of this for the future of our species, it's occurred to me, is that we can't detect any other intelligent life in the universe, which is pretty amazing given the fact that there are billions of galaxies with billions of stars. It's occurred to me to wonder why that is. It's occurred to me to wonder, I wonder if all intelligent species get to this point where they start taking control of their own evolution, for better or for worse. Suppose everybody else has flunked. Let's not us flunk. Thank you very much. Thank you.
We got time for a few questions. So I'll start with the first one. So what's a good stock pick?
Oh, what's a good stock pick? That's a good, yeah. It's amazing when I talk to huh? Oh, well, I can answer that question. When you talk to financiers about this, like you say, all right, if you knew for a fact that that there were all of these companies working on memory pills, and if you knew that that one of them was probably going to succeed in the next 3 to 5 years and bring the stuff on the market, but you didn't know which one, wouldn't it make sense to buy a basket of every company that you could possibly invest in? And they say, that's not investment, that's speculating. And I'm thinking, that's nuts. Now, if somebody else has got a better idea about how to handle this, see me after the meeting.
Maybe the index fund.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, questions?
Has this got any influence on law or law schools? John? You want to take the microphone?
Okay, all the development is happening in the urban environment, the science and like that. Where do you see the natural environment going and the wilderness happening? Do you think it's going to be overtaken, or do you think it'll hold its place?
Right. The question is, what happens in the natural environment? Well, one of the things that's interesting is that the bigger our problem at any given point in time, the more we reach out to our amazing new technologies. So obviously, if one of your big problems is energy, that's one of the first things we're doing is reaching out to our new technologies. Speaking of stock tips, there's a company called Nano Solar Inc, which I don't own any of because they haven't had their IPO yet. But they're really an interesting company. They're using nanotechnology, and they've basically got what looks like the world's biggest newspaper printing presses, and they run flexible plastic through it, and they print at the nano level circuits on this flexible plastic, which turns it into solar electricity generating flexible plastic at the cost of a coal plant or a nuclear plant. That's pretty amazing technology and its implications, you know. I mean, it's like, remember when telephones were, AT&T was a top-down hierarchy, and think of what the internet has done to telephones. Well, suppose this technology starts distributing electricity generating as fast, you know, and think of how fast this stuff works, think how fast that'll get picked up. Suppose that everybody, like today in the internet, everybody who is a receiver is also a producer. Does that change things a little bit? Similarly, whenever, if the environment is a concern for you, nanotechnology involves membranes that can cheaply separate waste from clean water or salt from clean water. Water is a big issue, you know, and these technologies are offering possibilities that could really dramatically change a lot of our industrial age concerns like pollution.
I was just thinking about the fact that the internet is so pivotal in the largest part of our group behavior, and it's going to be pivotal in our law schools because that's the instinctive behavior now of the next generation.
Yes.
And that's what they're doing in class instead of paying attention to the prof. So we have to adapt to where they are, put the information where they're going to use it. But I'm also thinking that it's also a very vulnerable point, even though it was designed for, you know, always up. The internet can be harmed by, you know, hackers or something, and then we lose the ability to generate responses as a group.
Right. Oh yeah, that's definitely a hell scenario. The idea that, you know, that we become dependent on our technologies and then the technology somehow goes away. I mean, has anybody gone through a multi-day power outage lately? You know, John described me as the troll of a small forest in the foothills of the Blue Ridge. I live on in the middle of 88 acres of trees, and I've got quite a bit of 19th century technology, so that's not that big a deal for me if the power goes out. But for most people, it's a big damn problem. Well, you know, suppose then, you know, the question is, suppose Google is, I mean, the guys who created Google, from the first day, nobody took them seriously until recently, but from day one, they've been talking about what they're really building at Google is an artificial intelligence. And they're utterly serious about the idea of Google implants. You know, so what happens if you have a Google implant and then the battery dies? I mean, you know, this has got serious implications. But the thing is that all of our technologies, you know, have, when they're brand new, always freak people out. When railroads were first created, there was a serious concern that if you got up to 20 miles an hour, that the speed would be so great that all the air would be sucked out of your lungs and that people would die, you know. So, I mean, there's always this concern. I don't mean to poo-poo these things, but I mean, the question is, how robust are our worlds? Yes, the hell scenario exists. Yes, this could be incredibly bad. You can imagine, you know, the people who talk about the hell scenario, you know, are genuinely worried about wiping out the human race in the next 20 years. They're genuinely worried about that. And that's the optimistic version. There's some even worse versions that involve wiping out all of life on Earth. That's a serious, credible scenario. But the question is, you know, how robust are our strategies? How robust, you know, can we operate as a group? I'm thinking, for example, of my 18-year-old daughter who just graduated from high school. She and her pals, when they left school at the end of the day, they each come home and they turn on all their toys. They turn on their IM and their email and their cell phones and everything else. And they would then proceed to be quite adult in how they approach the problems of their homework. They'd work on it as a team, the way most sane adults do. And naturally enough, and those who got geometry helped those who didn't, and those who got history helped those who didn't. And they, naturally enough, produced results that were superior to what any individual could have produced. It makes total sense. And then, the next morning, they'd go back to school. And when that happened, The first thing that they were told to do is they had to turn off all the machines or they'd be expelled. And then, if they proceeded to try to operate as a swarm or a flock, they'd be expelled. That would be called cheating. Okay, well, you know, schools right now are set up as an industrial age process in which, you know, what matters is measuring individuals, because what you're trying to do is produce ideal cogs into the machine. Well, suppose that that's an industrial age model that's going the way of so many other industrial age models. You know, suppose what matters is how well a network functions, because a network just moves a lot faster than does an industrial age system. Suppose that what we're doing, you know, the underpinning of our ideas about what constitutes school are going through a seismic shift. Suppose social learning is what matters. You know, are you architecturally set up to have people work as swarms? You know, I mean, right now this whole industrial age routine where somebody stands up at a podium and he does all the talking and everybody else does all the listening, I mean, we know this just bores everybody to tears. You know, all that it takes is for an alternative to emerge, and the question is, you know, what happens? I mean, Kaplan, you know, the guys who help you, you know, take your essay, your LSATs, all that stuff, well, they already own 3 law schools. You know, I mean, someday the restraint of trade business that law schools are in, you know, may lose this, and they may end up getting accredited across the country. You know, so when that day comes,
Never happen.
What?
Never happen.
Never happen. That can't happen. Yeah, that's when you tell scenarios, when you do work with scenarios, and you say that can't happen. There's the mark of an unexamined intellectual underpinning. You know. That yeah. Thank God for Kaplan. As someone who, you know, hopes to have a pension from the Washington Post Company, I say thank God for Kaplan.
That sounds like a good place to end off. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good job.